Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States and the President of the Italian Republic.
Thank you very much. Today, it is my honor to welcome President Sergio Mattarella of Italy to the White House. We've known each other for a while, we've dealt with each other for a while, and we've had some really great conversations. We've had a very productive discussion throughout the day with our staffs and representatives, and I look forward to hosting the President and his daughter Laura at a reception for the Italian Americans this evening. I look forward to that very much. The United States and Italy are bound together by a shared cultural and political heritage dating back thousands of years to ancient Rome. Over the centuries, the Italian people have blessed our civilization with magnificent works of art, science, philosophy, architecture, and music. On Monday, we pay tribute to the Italian explorer who led a voyage of discovery to the New World, a gentleman known as Christopher Columbus, and to me it will always be called Columbus Day. Some people don't like that, I do. Today, the United States and Italy draw strength from our cherished heritage as we work together to safeguard our people and promote prosperity. As NATO allies, our countries cooperate closely on a wide range of critical defense issues, including the protection of our nations against radical Islamic terrorism. The problem is that Italy is only paying 1.1% instead of the mandated 2%, which by and of itself is a low number. It should be probably 4%, anywhere from 4 to 5%. Only 8 of the 28 NATO countries are paying the 2%, meaning 20 of the countries are delinquent in the payment to NATO, and they have been for many years. Germany is at 1.3% at most, depending on calculation. Spain is at less than 1%. Turkey, believe it or not, is almost current, almost paid up. And I want to just thank Secretary General Stoltenberg because he's going around saying that President Trump was able to raise over $100 billion last year, which is true, but it's still only a large fraction. It's still a large fraction of the amount of money that's owed by many of the countries that aren't paying their dues. We hope that Italy will boost its defense spending in order to meet NATO's minimum 2% of GDP. And I will say that they have just purchased, and we learned about it today, 90 brand new, beautiful F-35s. The strike fighter program is doing phenomenally well. One of our major challenges and the challenge facing NATO today is instability in the Mediterranean, North Africa areas. And much of the volatility in that region stems from the violence in Libya, which is very close to Italy's borders. The President and I were talking about that at great length, big problem. The ongoing Libyan conflict has led to a migration crisis, placing significant and unfair burdens on Italy in particular. I've asked that the European Union get much more involved because they're not involved enough. That's a problem for the European Union. They do very well with us on trade. They had a trade surplus with the United States over the last 5 or 6 years of about $150 billion a year. They have to get more involved and help Italy. The Italian government has stepped up as a leader to fight this illegal immigration. We urge also our NATO and European partners to take firm action to halt illegal immigration and uphold sovereign borders. Immigration control is critical to national security and essential to the well-being of our citizens. Nations must be able to vet, screen, and properly manage entry and admission into society. You know the legislation that we had passed. We have absolutely no help from the Democrats on our borders, absolutely nothing. The closure of loopholes, which would be very easy to do, they refuse to do. They want open borders, and Italy doesn't want open borders, and we're not going to have open borders. and our numbers are very good. I want to thank also Mexico and the President of Mexico for the great help they've given us. They've helped us much more than the Democrats. Here in the United States, we're taking dramatic action to secure our borders, shut down smuggling networks, and speed the removal of illegal immigrants. We're moving the MS-13 gang members out literally by the thousands. They're getting out. We're dropping them out of our country, and they can't come back. And what we've done with Guatemala and Honduras and El Salvador is, they tell me, close to a miracle, the agreements that we've signed. They accept them back and they keep them back. It's a much different relationship than we've ever had with those three countries, and I want to thank the leadership of those three countries. We've been working very well together. Our message is clear. If you enter illegally the United States, you will be promptly returned home. They're all returning home. It takes a long time because we've had years of people coming in, staying, and that's the end of that. President Mattarella also discussed the steps we must take to enhance commerce and economic growth between our two countries. Our nations are already investing nearly $70 billion in each other's economies. Without the burdens, as unfair as they are, imposed by the European Union, we would actually have a much higher number than $70 billion between Italy and the United States. However, we can do more, and we can achieve fairness and reciprocity, which we don't have right now. America's trade deficit with Italy accounts for about 20% of our nearly $150 to $170 billion, probably, according to some estimates, could even be $178 billion annual trade deficit with the European Union. We welcome Italy's support for a mutually beneficial trade agreement with the EU that ensures a level playing field for American workers, and it hasn't been that for many, many years. I could solve the problem instantly, but it would be too harsh. It would involve tariffs on European products coming into this country, and for right now, we're going to try and do it without that. But that would solve the problem instantly because the United States is not being treated fairly. We also welcome Italy's participation in combating predatory trade and investment practices worldwide, especially in technology. We must work together to shield our intellectual property, critical infrastructure, ports, and data security. I applaud Italy's recent commitment to use only safe and trustworthy technology providers, components, and supply chains, especially relating to the 5G networks. We will work together to take further steps to secure the technology of the future. And speaking of 5G and how it relates to China, we've done a rather incredible trade deal, especially right now, phase one, for our farmers and for the finance industry, financial services. And it's been really quite amazing. Excuse me? Is there a problem back there? It's been quite amazing. The level of receptivity has been much different than in the past. China and myself, our representatives, their representatives, have made a deal from $40 to $50 billion in farm products, agricultural products. People said we were hoping for 20. So China's been good, and they've already started purchasing, by the way. That's already started. The agreement, we hope to have it signed sometime prior to Chile. We're going to Chile. President Xi and myself will probably do a signing over there of phase one, assuming it all gets finished up, which we think it will. There's been a lot of goodwill between the United States and China over the last period of time. So we're signing from $40 to $50 billion, and that will, because it was incorrectly reported in the press, shockingly, that will take place. It's already started taking place. They're already purchasing a lot of farm product. All of the banking regulations and all of the financial services, all of the other things that are included. And there are many other things in phase one that I won't talk about now, but all of that is moving along rapidly. Bob Lighthizer is with us someplace here, and he is in the process of getting it completed. Have a great staff of people working on both sides. Mr. President, it's a true pleasure to host you in our nation's capital, you and your family, and your deeply personal relationship to your country. You love your country so much. Just in speaking to you for a short while, I see how much you love Italy, and I can understand that. It's really an inspiration, a testament to the patriotism and pride of the Italian people. Great spirit for Italy. America is grateful to have true friends and allies in the citizens of Italy. We have such a great relationship with the people of Italy. The United States is likewise thankful to be home to more than 16 million Italian Americans. Tonight, here at the White House, we'll celebrate our deep and abiding friendship with Italy and the really incredible Italian people. The U.S.-Italian alliance is stronger than ever before, and we're going to be celebrating that tonight with you, Mr. President. So I look forward to that very much in a little while. And in the meantime, thank you very, very much, and we'd love to have you say a few words. Thank you.
I want to thank President Trump very much for his invitation and for the welcome, both to myself and to my entire delegation. The relationship between the United States and Italy are marked by a deep friendship and by common interests, both strengthened by the presence here in the U.S. of so many Americans of Italian descent. That's another reason why I'm so happy to be here on this visit in October, dedicated this year again to Italian heritage. I'd like to go back to what President Trump was saying when he mentioned Christopher Columbus, who opened up new horizons. He got to know and connected continents which ignored one another. And based on the role the U.S. has in the world, it seems to me that he did a good job back then. To Italy, the U.S. is not only a fundamental ally, it is also a country with which it shares the same path of democracy, a country which shares the same values of freedom, of the protection of human rights, of the respect for minorities, of the rule of law. Italy's international vision is based on the pillar, which is the Atlantic Alliance, which then over time also led to European integration of the European Union, which was a consistent process. These are two essential elements in our foreign policy and in our cooperation. We are united. The U.S., Italy, and Europe are united due to our history, due to our common references, due to the culture we share, and due to the very intense human relations we have between our fellow citizens. As President Trump mentioned earlier, we talked about NATO. And NATO is first and foremost a community of values, which Italy recognizes and to which Italy participates with a great deal of conviction and very factually. Italy has always contributed very intensely to NATO missions and operations, and with a great deal of effectiveness. We have substantially supported the activities of the alliance. And I'd like to remind you of the fact that besides being the fifth contributor to NATO, Italy is the second contributor in terms of the troops it devotes to NATO missions. And after the U.S., we rank number 2 in the number of troops participating in NATO operations. Along with all of the other missions we perform through the UN and in the coalition against terrorism, which has developed in recent years. And I'd like to remind you of the fact that as we speak, 6 Italian F-35s of the Italian Air Force are patrolling the skies over Iceland within the framework of the second NATO mandate as a way of ensuring peace and security. Italy has constantly reiterated that the transatlantic spirit has to be nurtured, protected with all of our strength in all the dimensions of the relationship we share. And with this spirit in mind, we hope, I hope, that with the new 5-year parliamentary term within the new European Union, we can foster our cooperation on trade between the U.S. and the EU. We are aiming to define solutions that can strengthen our relationships, because commercial trade tensions are to the benefit of no one. We feel that imposing tariffs on one another mutually is counterproductive, and it damages both of our economies. And I'd like to add that we share with the U.S. The belief that the WTO should be reformed as a way of making it more efficient and more effective. And as President Trump mentioned, we talked about Syria. We are deeply concerned with Turkey's offensive in the northeastern part of Syria. And this attack in a limited number of days has already caused a number of casualties and tens of thousands of refugees and displaced people. And there were plenty of victims amongst civilians as well. This is an attack which also has another risk, namely that of offering new space, which was unthinkable up to a few days ago to ISIS and to its criminal terrorist activities in Syria, in the Middle East, but not just in the Middle East, also in other continents around the world. Italy, in line with the EU's position, condemns the Turkish operations which are ongoing. We have also talked about Libya. And we talked about this topic, as all of the other topics, with the spirit of friendship and in a very tangible way. The current situation in Libya is a source of deep concern to us, and we are convinced of the fact that the violence and the military attacks can destabilize all of North Africa. It increases the threat of terrorism, and it contributes to creating an environment which fosters all kinds of illegal trafficking. And of course, it jeopardizes the production of energy in that country. And most of all, it denies the Libyan people the possibility of finding a peaceful solution, which it deserves after so many years. We talked about our relationships with China together with President Trump. And through an open dialogue with China, we want to defend the world order based on clear rules, with the UN at the center of the world order, and an open and fair market, one which complies with the principles of the World Trade Organization. And from this point of view, we discussed two topics, namely security concerning new technologies, and I'm referring to 5G. Italy has been paying close attention to our national security requirements. It has paid close attention to it, and it will continue to do so. We also underlined the need to have a level playing field in trade and in investments, so that there can be a fair and healthy trade relationship. There needs to be an access to the market which doesn't discriminate anybody. And we need to be able to protect intellectual property for all of the economic players involved without any theft of technology. All of these topics were discussed with a full spirit of friendship, with a great deal of cooperation, along with many other topics. And this opportunity was also an excellent opportunity to reiterate the friendship between the U.S. and Italy, and the very strong relationship between our two countries within the framework of the Atlantic Alliance. And for that reason, I want to thank President Trump very much for our meeting, for our talks, for your welcome. And I'll be seeing you again this afternoon on an occasion which will be filled with a great many elements of meaning and importance. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. And the WTO, the World Trade Organization, as everyone knows, we just won $7.5 billion because of unfair trade practices, and that will be distributed in a fair way throughout various countries Europe, and we're talking to the president about that as it pertains to Italy. He thought we were a little bit harsh on Italy, and we don't want to be harsh on Italy. We'll never do that. So we'll look at that very strongly. We will look at that for you. That was one of the requests made, and we will be taking a look at that. Please. How are you?
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to ask about Turkey. Did President Erdogan's decisions surprise you? And if they did not surprise you, would you make the same decision as you made before in removing U.S. forces? And I guess we just heard that UAW and GM may have been able to work out a deal. If I could get your reaction to that and what that might mean for the U.S. economy. And Mr. President, if I could ask you about the digital tax. Did the two of you discuss a possible digital tax as it relates to Amazon and Google? What progress were you able to make on that front? Thank you very much.
No, President Erdogan's decision didn't surprise me because he's wanted to do that for a long time. He's been building up troops on the border with Syria for a long time, as you know. Our soldiers are mostly gone from the area. We only had 26, 28, but under 50. I think it's probably 28, but under 50 soldiers, and which is a very tiny force. And it didn't surprise me at all. This is they've been warring for many years. It's unnatural for us, but it's sort of natural for them. They fight, and they fight long, and they fight hard, and they've been fighting Syria for a long time, and on the border, that's the border with Syria. And I say, why are we protecting Syria's land? Assad's not a friend of ours. Why are we protecting their land? And Syria also has a relationship with the Kurds, who, by the way, are no angels, okay? Who is an angel? There aren't too many around. But Syria has a relationship with the Kurds, so they'll come in for their border, and they'll fight. They may bring partners in. They could bring Russia in, and I say welcome to it. Russia went into Afghanistan when it was the Soviet Union, and it became Russia, became a much smaller country because of Afghanistan. You can overextend. You can do a lot of things, but frankly, if Russia is going to help in protecting the Kurds, that's a good thing, not a bad thing, but it would be led by Syria. And Syria doesn't want Turkey to take its land. I can understand that. But what does that have to do with the United States of America if they're fighting over Syria's land? Are we supposed to fight a NATO member in order that Syria, who is not our friend, keeps their land? I don't think so. But Syria does have a relationship with the Kurds. The thing that's common is that everybody hates ISIS. Now, the PKK, which is a part of the Kurds, as you know, is probably worse at terror and more of a terrorist threat in many ways than ISIS. So it's a very semi-complicated, not too complicated if you're smart, but it's a semi-complicated problem. And I think it's a problem that we have very nicely under control. We have two countries wanting their land. We have one country that wants land perhaps that doesn't belong to them because they want to have a 22-mile strip of, they call it freedom. They call it a lot of things. They want to get terrorists out. You have another country that says you can't have our land, and they're going to have to work that out. Now, with that being said, Vice President Mike Pence is going there. He'll be leaving either late tonight or tomorrow, and he's going to leave yesterday, but they have to have certain security done. He's a very important man in our country, and he'll be leaving with Secretary of State Pompeo. We already have representatives there negotiating with Turkey. We put massive sanctions on Turkey, and we have additional sanctions on Turkey. And when I ran on a basis we're going to bring our great soldiers back home where they belong. We don't have to fight these endless wars. We're bringing them back home. That's what I want on. And some people, whether you call it the military-industrial complex or beyond that, they'd like me to stay. One of the problems I have, and one of, for instance, with the witch hunt, you have people that want me to stay. They want me to fight forever. They do very well fighting. That's what they want to do, fight. A lot of companies want to fight because they make their weapons based on fighting, not based on peace. And they take care of a lot of people. I want to bring our soldiers back home. We're not a police force. We're a fighting force. We're the greatest fighting force ever. I spent $2.5 trillion over the last almost 3 years rebuilding our military. When I took it over, it was a mess. It was an absolute mess. It was totally depleted. You know that. A lot of people know that. Honest people all know that. When I was thinking about having to do something, one of our generals came in to see me and he said, "Sir, we don't have ammunition." I said, "That's a terrible thing you just said." He said, "We don't have ammunition. Now we have more ammunition than we've ever had. We have more missiles. We have more rockets. Our nuclear's been totally updated and in some cases new. Hopefully, to God, we never have to use it. But we have the most powerful nuclear base by far in the world. And we have things that we never had before. We have a great modern military, but that doesn't mean we're going to waste it. It doesn't mean we're going to deplete it like we did before with these crazy, endless wars. So Turkey and Syria will hopefully work it out between themselves. Hopefully ISIS will be guarded. I spoke with, as you know, a wonderful man yesterday, general, from the Kurds. You all know who I'm talking about. Some of you have seen the letter that I put out to Erdogan. I gave it to him, President Erdogan, and some of you have seen it. With the general, I said, listen, don't open those doors and let them out just to create more havoc so that we come in. Because some of those doors we just opened. Let's create some havoc and some political exposure for the President of the United States. We were the ones that we were the ones that got ISIS. We're the ones that took care of it, specifically me, because I'm the one that gave the order, because when I came in under President Obama, ISIS was a disaster all over that area. I was the one that got them. We were the ones that captured them. And I will say this, that Russia, Iran, Syria, and to maybe a slightly lesser extent, Turkey, they all hate ISIS as much as we do. And it's their part of the world. We're 7,000 miles away. I campaigned on bringing our soldiers back home. And that's what I'm doing. That includes other places too, many other places. Statutorily, it takes a period of time. Diplomatically, it takes a period of time. But, you know, we're in many countries, many countries. I'm embarrassed to tell you how many. I know the exact number, but I'm embarrassed to say it because it's so foolish. We're in countries, we're protecting countries that don't even like us. They take advantage of us. They don't pay, nothing. You probably saw, some of you wrote and covered the fact that we're sending some additional troops to Saudi Arabia. That's true, and I appreciate the fact that I negotiated for a short period of time, a matter of minutes, with Saudi Arabia, and they've agreed to pay for the full cost of all of that deployment, and more, much more. A very rich country, they should be paying, and so should many other countries be paying if they want this kind of protection. Same thing with NATO. We're at 4%, and other countries are at 1%, and certainly a European country benefits much more than we do with NATO. I mean, it's there for a reason. And perhaps we benefit, but not nearly as much as the European countries. Some people say we don't benefit at all. We put ourselves in harm's way. But we do that for Europe, but then they treat us badly on trade. Not fair. So I would say that we're in a great position. We're doing what I said. We have two countries that are going to argue over their border. Hopefully they'll work it out. We're going to try and work it out. I think our vice president, who's a very capable man, will do well tomorrow. He's going to meet with President Erdogan. President Erdogan said he wouldn't meet with anybody, and he took that back just a little while ago, and he said, no, I will. And I think they'll have a successful meeting. If they don't, the sanctions and tariffs and other things that we're doing, we will do and are doing to Turkey, will be devastating to Turkey's economy. I got Pastor Brunson home. Nobody else could do it. The previous administration tried very hard. They were unable to do it. I did it very quickly. And let's see what happens. But I think we'll be successful. But we got to get out of the endless wars. We have to bring our troops back home. I go to Walter Reed and I give out Purple Hearts. Just did it on Friday. I see the incredible soldiers coming home to Dover, coming home in a coffin, on areas that we have nothing to do with. We have nothing to do with. And it's heartbreaking. I sign letters all the time to parents whose son was shot in different places in the Middle East, mostly. It's very heartbreaking to see, very heartbreaking. So I've said it, and it's through strength, not through weakness. Much harder to do what I'm doing. I could be like all of these others. Oh, just leave them there, leave them there. No, I can't do it. Much easier for me, much probably politically better for me just to say we'll leave a lot of people there and we'll fight. They don't even know what they're fighting for. It's much more difficult politically. It's not politically expedient, it's just the opposite. And I have people even on my side, they want to fight. I say, why are we fighting? I don't know. They don't even know. So you have Syria and you have Turkey. They're going to argue it out. Maybe they're going to fight it out, but our men aren't going to get killed over it. And just one other thing, they've been fighting for hundreds of years. This has been going on for hundreds of years. So it's a long answer, but I think I've got much of it out. Thank you very much. Please, question?
Yeah, there's a question for the president. Yeah, there was a question of the digital tax.
Oh, sure. Thank you. Mr. President, I was asking if the two of you discussed a possible digital tax and where that discussion might be going, in particular as it might relate to Google and Amazon and others. Thank you, sir.
Sì, ho compreso.
Yes, I understood the question. No, we did not talk about this. And of course, this is an open issue. It's very important. It is being discussed in a number of different international contexts so that this important issue can be discussed and solved.
Buongiorno.
By the way, the digital tax, I have to say, is interesting because I did discuss it with another European Union member, namely France, and France is basically doing the digital tax. And I'm no fan of those companies. They were against me. Somebody said I lost maybe 2 million votes, maybe more because of Facebook. But these are American companies, and whether you like it or not, they're great, big American companies. And I'm not happy with the digital tax where France and European Union is taxing our companies. And as you know, we imposed a big tax on French wine because of it. So just to answer your question, Kevin, I'm not happy about the fact that they are taxing our companies. I'm not a fan of those companies, but if anybody's going to tax those companies, it should be the USA. It shouldn't be France and the European Union, who have really taken advantage of the United States. Okay? Thank you very much. Good question. Okay, you can pick somebody, Mr. President. Yes.
Giovanna Pancheri, Sky.
A question for President Mattarella. As far as Syria is concerned,
Adesso meglio? Riesce a sentirmi, Presidente? Per quanto riguarda la Siria,
as far as Syria is concerned, in recent days, you talked about the risks Europe runs in terms of not responding to the situation. In recent days, some European countries, including Italy, have discussed a possible ban on selling weapons to Turkey. Do you think this can be an adequate way to respond to the situation, also considering that Turkey is and continues to be a member of NATO?
Mr. President, I would like to ask you, on September 27, Attorney General Barr has been in Rome to meet with Italian intelligence officials. I would like to know if you personally talk with Prime Minister Conte to arrange this meeting, which kind of information Attorney General Barr was looking for, and if you were satisfied from the information the Italian intelligence gathered for you. Thank you.
Well, I don't know the details. I just know that our country is looking into the corruption of the 2016 election. It was a corrupt election, whether it's Comey or McCabe or Strzok or his lover, Lisa Page, the two great lovers. There was a lot of corruption. Maybe it goes right up to President Obama. I happen to think it does. But you look at Brennan and you look at Clapper, and you get some real beauties. I know that they're looking into the corruption. Obviously, the IG report's coming out soon, so we'll find out. I don't know anything about the meeting, but certainly it would be appropriate because the word is, and you read it in the same papers that I do, that they did go to other countries to try and hide what they were doing. Italy may have been one of them. So you'll really have to ask Attorney General Barr. Okay? Thank you.
Sì, la Turchia.
Yes, Turkey is a member of NATO, and that is something very important, of course. I'd like to remind you of the fact that currently there is an Italian contribution to Turkey. We have an anti-missile system, which Italy has been having in Turkey for a number of years within the context of a NATO mission. As the Latin said, amicus platus de magis amica veritas, which means something more important than my friendship is the truth. The relationships of friendships and alliances, of course, don't mean that we can't say that the Turkish attack on Syria is a serious mistake. So we condemn that attack with no hesitation whatsoever, due to the reasons I mentioned earlier. The solution, of course, doesn't lie in sanctions. And if the situation continues, sanctions will be inevitable. And Italy has made announcements, as has the European Union. The only solution is to stop all military operations and to retreat from that area as a way of stopping all of the dangers that I mentioned earlier.
John, go ahead.
I want to pick up on what your comments on Turkey and Syria.
Sure.
Even after all you have seen, ISIS prisoners freed, all the humanitarian disaster, you don't have any regret for giving Erdogan the green light to invade?
I didn't give him a green light.
Well, did you tell him?
That's
Did he
the
defy
same thing
you?
as you just, when you make a statement like that, it's so deceptive. Just the opposite of a green light. First of all, we had virtually no soldiers there. They were mostly gone. Just a tiny little group. And they would have been in harm's way. You have a massive army on the other side of the border. But more importantly, I didn't give him a green light. And if anybody saw the letter, which can be released very easily if you'd like, I could certainly release it. But I wrote a letter right after that conversation, a very powerful letter. There was never given a green light. They've been wanting to do that for years, and frankly, they've been fighting for many, many years. And when you ask a question like that, it's very deceptive, John. It's almost as deceptive as you showing all of the bombings taking place in Syria, and it turned out that the bombing that you showed on television took place in Kentucky. So, and I'm not even sure that ABC apologized for that, but certainly it was a terrible thing. I'm looking at this, I'm saying, wow, that's pretty bad. And it was in Kentucky, it wasn't in Syria, so I don't know what you're going to do about that, but I think ABC owes an apology.
Did you see, Lindsey Graham just said of your remarks that you made in the Oval Office that if you keep talking like that, quote, this will be a disaster worse than Obama's decision to leave Iraq.
No, Lindsey Graham would like to stay in the Middle East for the next 1,000 years with thousands of soldiers and fighting other people's wars. I want to get out of the Middle East. I think Lindsey should focus right now on judiciary, like the Democrats, the do-nothing Democrats, as I call them, because they're doing nothing. They're getting nothing done. They're not getting USMCA done between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. They're getting nothing done. And I think Lindsey should focus on judiciary. He ought to find out about what happened with Comey, what happened with McCabe, Lisa, what happened with Peter Strzok, what happened with President Obama, what happened with Brennan. That's what Lindsey ought to focus on. That's what the people of South Carolina want him to focus on. The people of South Carolina don't want us to get into a war with Turkey, a NATO member, or with Syria. Let them fight their own wars. They've been fighting for 1,000 years. Let them fight their own wars. The people of South Carolina want to see those troops come home, and I want an election based on that, and that's the way it is, whether it's good or bad. That's the way it is. And if you look at this country, I'd be willing to bet anything, political instinct, that that's what the country wants. I'm not going to get involved in a war between Turkey and Syria, especially when, if you look at the Kurds, and again, I say this with great respect, they're no angels. If you look at PKK, take a look at PKK. ISIS respects PKK. You know why? Because they're as tough or tougher than ISIS. You take a look at a lot of the things having to do, you have to say it, nobody wants to say it. We're making the Kurds look like they're angels. We paid a lot of money to the Kurds, tremendous amounts of money. We've given them massive fortunes. And you know what? It's wonderful. They fought with us, but we paid a lot for them to fight with us. But just so you understand, we were the ones that captured ISIS. People let some go. They opened a couple of doors to make us look as bad as possible. We have a situation where Turkey is taking land from Syria. Syria's not happy about it. Let them work it out. We shouldn't be over there. And you should get your accounts correct. And you shouldn't be showing up buildings blowing up in Kentucky and say it's Syria, because that really is fake news. Yes, please, ask a question.
But you don't think the country's worried about ISIS? I mean, you mentioned earlier you think some of the countries might hate ISIS more than the United States.
Absolutely. Russia hates ISIS. Russia hates ISIS as much as the United States does. Iran hates ISIS. I mean, we're fighting a war for Russia. We're fighting a war for Iran. You look at Syria. Syria hates ISIS. We're over there killing ISIS, and we're killing. Don't forget, we're 7,000 miles away. So we're killing ISIS. We're 7,000 miles away. Russia's much closer. Iran is right there. Turkey is right there. They all hate ISIS. Turkey a little bit less so, but the others very much. Russia had a plane blown up by ISIS. Russia wants nothing to do with ISIS. Russia's tough. They can kill ISIS just as well, and they happen to be in their neighborhood. And all I'm saying is this. I'm not going to lose potentially thousands and tens of thousands of American soldiers fighting a war between Turkey and Syria. Syria is not our friend. Assad is not our friend. That's the way it goes. Please ask a question.
But Mr. President, you said you withdrew 28 troops.
28. They say it was 28. We thought it was 50, but it was about 28. 26 to 28 troops.
And
all
look what's
accounted
happened
for.
since
Nobody
that-
injured. Listen. All accounted for, nobody injured, nobody missing. It's really nice.
But look what's happened since those troops were withdrawn and since you had that conversation with President Erdogan.
You know what's happened? No American soldiers have been killed. That's what's happened. And other people will go in, and very easy to recapture those people that probably the Kurds let go to make a little bit stronger political impact. And that's okay. I fully understand it, but that's the way it goes. We're bringing our soldiers back home, and we've done a great job. We were supposed to be in Syria for 1 month. That was 10 years ago. And we've been a police force. It's time to bring our soldiers back home. That's the way it is. We've had no soldiers injured or hurt. That's because I'm president. And we're the boss. Just remember that. We have the most powerful military in the world by far. Please.
Mr. President, what is the view in Europe of the President's decision to withdraw, to make the abrupt decision to withdraw from Syria?
Sulla Siria,
Well, I already answered a question regarding Syria. I'm not here to judge what other countries do, but to say what my country's position is. And our position is what I mentioned earlier on Syria, on the fact that we condemn what Turkey decided to do in recent days with no possible ambiguity.
Donatella Dinitto di La Presse.
Donatella Dinitto, La Presse. A question for President Mattarella. President Trump seems to being open on discussing the possible tariffs. So do you think it will be possible to avoid tariffs being imposed in 2 days' time? And a question for President Trump. Now, we all know your concerns concerning Huawei entering Italy's security system. Are you satisfied with the measures that Italy decided to implement?
Well, I'll answer first. Yes, I am satisfied. They've been very accommodating. They weren't at the beginning, and they have been since then. And I want to just thank the Italian government and your prime minister, actually, in addition to the president. But as you know, I had long conversations with my friend, and they were very nice. So I am very satisfied. And we just discussed the same conversation with the president. Very satisfied. Thank you.
per quanto riguarda
As far as the topic of tariffs is concerned, tariffs following the WTO decision on the EU's contribution or the subsidies to the Airbus consortium. I already mentioned what our belief is. Let me repeat it. I think that within the transatlantic relationship and with the friendship that there has always been between the U.S. and the EU, it would be preferable to discuss our respective positions so that we can find a solution which takes into account the requirements of both parties, and that's wholly possible. The alternative would be that of imposing tariffs. Currently, following the WTO's decision concerning Airbus, there may be tariffs. And there may be tariffs in 6 months' time concerning the subsidies given to Boeing. This is a mere race between tariffs and mutual tariffs. I think it would be best to meet and to deal with our mutual needs so that a solution can be found. But if we don't do this now, it will have to be done soon. And I believe it would be best to find a solution immediately instead of imposing tariffs, which would lead to other tariffs, and that would be a damage to both of our economies.
Well, actually, the tariff situation is interesting because it's like I said with China, and it turned out to be true. We cannot lose a war of tariffs because the imbalance is so great between the United States and, in this case, the European Union. Also true with China. That turned out to be right. We've collected tens of billions of dollars of tariffs. We've given some to the farmers to make them even. And now the farmers are going to have a bigger contract than they ever thought possible. They won't be able to produce even that much, but I think they will because they're incredible and genius. As I say jokingly, but probably not jokingly, they'll just have to buy larger tractors, which is probably what they're doing right now. But the farmers come out so well. But in a war of tariffs with the European Union, the trade imbalance is so great that we can't lose that because they do much more business than we do. And that's unfortunate. But the word reciprocity is probably my favorite word. Of all of these words, all of the semi-complicated, complicated, to me not complicated at all, things that we're doing, it's got to be reciprocal. And it's not. The European Union's taken tremendous advantage of the United States. Many of us come through, one way or the other, through the European Union. That's the good news. The bad news is they've been very smart. They've been very smart. Jean-Claude has been brilliant. Now he's leaving, but he's been brilliant at really helping them and not helping us. And so that's changing now. But we can't lose that particular war of tariffs because the trade imbalance is tremendous. It's tremendous. And if you look at what they don't have, the barriers that they put up tremendous barriers to our doing business in Europe. Tremendous barriers, both from a monetary standpoint and what they call non-monetary barriers. It's a very tough thing. Our farm products, very hard to get them in. Our cars, very hard to get them in. And yet they send Mercedes, they send BMW, then they send Volkswagen, Renault, in the case of France. So it's a very tough situation for us for many years, but now it's a very tough situation for them because I can remedy the situation very easily. And there really is not any financial counterattack. Hopefully I don't have to do that. With all of that being said, we are talking. We're talking with some new people in Europe. And I hope it's going to be successful. That way we don't have to talk about it or worry about it because our relationship should be a great one. But we have to be treated fairly on NATO, and we have to be treated fairly on trade with the European Union. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Other matters, look, I want to express my gratitude to the Kurds. They were great fighters. And we had a terrific alliance with them. Put ISIL not totally out of business, but certainly in a very difficult spot. They were able to detain a lot of extraordinarily bad people that others did not want. I'm sorry that we are where we are. I hope the Vice President and Secretary of State can somehow repair the damage. But this was an extremely valuable alliance. Having said that, Turkey is a NATO ally. We don't want to totally necessarily to drive him into the arms of the Russians, but this is a very concerning situation we find ourselves in, and I hope we can find a way out of it. I know the House is going to pass some kind of legislation targeting Turkey in reaction to this. We're looking at that on this side as well, and we'll be watching carefully this diplomatic mission of the Vice President and Secretary of State, and wishing them well.
We had some good developments on the trade front. We had a deal with Japan that was signed, a partial deal with China still waiting to be finalized. But the one deal that is teed up and ready to go is the United States, Mexico, Canada free trade agreement. And I'm certainly hoping that the House will be able to multitask in their rush to impeach the president, that it doesn't take away from the things that I think the American people sent us here to work on. We've made great economic progress. 6.4 million jobs have been created since the president took office. Unemployment is historically low, 3.5%. But there are parts of our economy that aren't experiencing that. One is agriculture. We have a lot of farmers and ranchers. Some help. They desperately need a trade deal like USMCA, which will open up markets. They're our two biggest trading markets for American agriculture. And couple that with what happened with the Japan deal, and hopefully continue forward progress on China. This would be really good economic news for all sectors of our economy, but for sure farmers and ranchers and farmers. So again, I hope that the progress that we've made isn't negated as the House continues down this path that they're on, because I think there are clearly issues that the American people want to see addressed. They want us to focus on those things that will improve their standard of living, their quality of life, and getting the USMCA trade deal done is certainly one of the steps on the road toward that. So it's up to the House. They've got ball control. It's been now over 300 days, or 320 days now since the president signed off on this deal. And they still haven't taken it up in the House of Representatives. As soon as they do, we'll move it to the Senate, put it on the president's desk, and get a trade deal in place. That will be a great benefit to all sectors of our economy, and particularly to our farmers and ranchers.
And one of the things the American people want to see addressed is the well-deserved raise for our troops, for our men and women in the field. The Democrats have been blocking that. They've been playing politics with it in spite of the agreement that we made 2 months ago on the budget. They're doing it for purely political reasons. We have men and women in harm's way. We have the largest deployment in Wyoming in the last 10 years, and I had a chance to spend time with them over the last week. I was in the desert with one group in the Arab Emirates, just across from the Straits of Hormuz. I was in the desert with another group in Kuwait, and then the third group I was with in Kosovo. They work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. They have earned and deserve a raise. It's time for the Democrats to stop playing politics with our men and women in uniform who are defending our freedoms every day.
Well, commenting on both of the topics that the leader talked about, it's certainly normal for baseball fans to be excited about a great baseball game, but there's nothing normal about the Nats beating the Cardinals. So let's just be sure that that's understood. It'll be proven again in the next season. The Nats are my second favorite National League team, and so we'll move forward with that. On the other topic, there's no question, well, there's a question. I can argue, though, that for the first 50 years of NATO, we had no more important NATO partner than Turkey. Looking at Russia to the north, all the problems south of them, to the south of Turkey, it is a big, important country. But under Erdogan has not been a reliable ally. The very idea that the more and more autocratic Erdogan could say, even for 24 hours, that he wasn't going to meet with the Vice President of the United States and was going to Turkey to see, is an outrageous thing for Erdogan to say. Buying Russian military equipment, suggesting he won't meet with the Vice President of the United States and the Secretary of State, I think shows how difficult this moment is. Turkey is in an effort to, I think, try to move in a different direction, but Erdogan has not been a reliable ally. The Kurds have been a reliable ally. I hope that the Vice President and Secretary of State can do something in this trip to begin to turn this back in a better direction.
Yes, and I am going to continue on that same theme as well regarding the actions by Turkey in Syria. They are dangerously alarming, and as someone who has served in uniform in the Middle East, it is very concerning to see that we really have left behind and abandoned a strategic partner, the Kurds, who stood by our men and women in uniform in the fight to defeat ISIL. I also believe that we are emboldening adversaries, just as Senator Blunt said, Russia, and in this case as well, Iran. They are not our friends, and yet Turkey is turning to those adversaries. I think we are reversing our stance on maintaining peace and stability in the region, and I believe that we are not engaged in a continuous war, but that we are looking for an enduring peace. That's the way that we can look at this particular situation. And so, again, I wanted to reiterate, I know many of us have these same concerns. There are a lot of security concerns that will come up now that we are withdrawing troops. The Trump administration has applied economic sanctions, economic pressure on Turkey, and I do think that that is the right course of action. But there is still much more to be determined in the upcoming days. I do hope that Erdogan will meet with Secretary Pompeo and the Vice President, and that we can come to a reasonable stance in this situation. But again, we shouldn't abandon our strategic partners. We do want to see peace in that region, and if there's a way that we can provide stability, we certainly need to do so.
We're going to meet the president shortly here. Your side of the aisle has backed the president on a number of issues, sometimes with the teeth. Do you think that you can convince him to correct his policy on Turkey? You've spoken out about this, but is it a loud enough voice on this? Does he hear you? And do you, because you have backed him on other issues, that sort of criticism would resonate with him?
Well, I certainly have told him personally as well as publicly, I disagree with the decision.
Should it be more than just a disagreement, though? I mean, that's
Well, I mean, what tools do we have? We've got potential for Turkish sanctions. We're looking at that. Any president has a lot of latitude in deploying troops, and many of us have been arguing that this was a mistake. It shouldn't have been done, and hoping that he would reverse course. There seems to be no evidence of it so far. But I think it was a mistake, and I hope it's not too late to stop this aggression. You know, as messy as Syria was, this was working pretty well. A mere 1,000 troops, keeping the Russians out and the Iranians out. ISIS bad guys in jail, and the Kurds did the heavy lifting here. Secretary Mehta pointed out Sunday they lost 11,000 people. I think we lost 10. Grappoli, we lost 10. But they did the lion's share of the fighting and deserved our applause.
The president continues to insist that he did nothing wrong in asking Ukraine to investigate his rivals. Do you agree? Is there really nothing to see here?
Look, this matter is being looked at in the House. They're denying due process to the president. I think he's entitled in this pending impeachment process that's going forward in the House to, number one, maybe have a vote on opening it. They don't think wanted to do that. Number two, to be allowed the kind of traditional due process opportunities that we provided President Clinton years ago. At least it seems to me, if they're going to go forward, providing fundamental fairness and due process is appropriate.
But on the substance, do you think his actions were appropriate? Not on process, on substance.
What I'm telling you is, if they insist on doing this, there was a headline in the Washington Post the day before the president They encourage us, going to do it. If they're going to do it, at least they ought to provide him the kind of due process protection that we provided President Clinton in a similar situation years ago.
Did the President's comments about the Kurds and his actions in Syria lead you to doubt his foreign policy judgment?
Well, in this particular instance, I disagree. I mean, I don't know how many times I need to say it, and I think I'm speaking for most members of my Congress that this was a mistake, and I hope it can be repaired.
But does it cause you to have broader concerns?
I have concerns about this particular decision. I think it was a mistake. I hope it can be repaired.
You said that impeachment stops with you. Does that mean you wouldn't have a trial with the House Senate?
No. Under the impeachment rules of the Senate, we'll take the matter up. The Chief Justice will be in the chair. We will have to convene every day, 6 days after 7, at 12:30 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The senators will not be allowed to speak, which would be good therapy for a number of them. And we intend to do our constitutional responsibility.
We're all here. Okay, Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm proud to be joined by Senators Durbin, Murray, Stabenow, and Cardin. Now, we returned to Washington yesterday, and it is clear the President's actions are putting the security of our homeland at risk and doing damage to our country in more ways than one. Abroad, the President is aiding and abetting an ISIS jailbreak. We have spent a decade trying to contain ISIS, and in one phone call, it seems on a whim, the President has reversed much of that progress. We've lost lives going after ISIS. We spent billions, probably trillions of dollars going after ISIS. And the President just undoes it without consulting his military, without consulting his diplomatic corps, and on a whim, does it? Unbelievable. Well, make no mistake about it. The President's actions have made America less safe. They certainly made the Kurds less safe. And we ache for them because they've been such loyal allies, and we send a signal to the world. Being a U.S. ally, at least as long as Trump is president, doesn't amount to much. But it hurts our homeland. General Mattis, an expert, said that danger from ISIS will greatly increase. And as ISIS prisoners escape and locate elsewhere, in places we have very little control, it would hurt America dramatically. So we believe the President should reverse course. He should consult with his military and his intelligence and his diplomatic corps and come up with a plan that protects the Kurds and protects America from ISIS's ravages. He created this problem. He's got to fix it. And that's the message that we will bring to the White House tomorrow. And as for the Senate, Leader McConnell a few minutes ago said the President should reverse course. I hope that means he will support the bipartisan resolution by Senators Menendez and Young here, Congress members Engel and McFall in the House. Put it on the floor and vote for it. There's an overwhelming vote for this resolution. The President will feel tremendous pressure to reverse course, and we're asking him to do it. Leader McConnell can actually act on that beyond words by putting this resolution as soon as it passes the House on the floor and holding a vote on it. My guess is it will get an overwhelming vote. So, that is about Syria. Now, one other thing we want to make a point here. One other point on Syria. In sum, President Trump's erratic and reckless decision has put Americans at risk, given a free hand to dictators, strengthened our enemies, and hurt our allies. A true dereliction of duty. Now, on The impeachment. We senators on the Democratic side believe that all the facts should come out. And we want to importune our Republican colleagues in the House and Senate and in the White House to let all of the facts come out. This is serious stuff. And we're going to work for that. But we are not going to take sides and make a final determination or any determination about the ultimate results of the trial until we get the facts when the trial occurs in the Senate. We are jurors, and our obligation is to listen to the facts impartially and come to conclusions at that point. But at the same time, we're focusing on that issue in terms of asking all information be made public. We are not giving up on our legislative priorities. It's vital to us to help the American people, to help people in the middle class, people struggling to get to the middle class with their so many needs. We all know that Leader McConnell has created a graveyard. The House has passed so many things that would help so many Americans we don't see any. We're going to use all the means we have to force votes. We'll use the CRA, Congressional Review Act, on a whole bunch of different issues when we can. And on Thursday, you'll hear from Senator Cardin. We'll be doing the CRA to reverse President Trump's awful decision to allow much more pollution and carbon into the air by reversing some of the rules on the Clean Power Act. And we'll be doing other things like that. Today, we focused on pensions. The House passed a bill that would help middle-class people who put their dollars away in a pension plan every week and are getting robbed of the fruits of their labor, their hard work. And you'll be hearing a lot more from us on a whole bunch of issues that help the middle class, that the House has moved forward on, and the President chooses to. Senator Durbin.
Thanks, Chuck. Let me say a word at the outset about the situation in Syria. When you consider what we are facing here today, we have a situation where the Kurds who are allies and literally offered their lives to serve with American troops are now being slaughtered. A situation where the United States' reputation and word is being questioned throughout the Middle East and the world. The empowerment of the Russians and Vladimir Putin. The empowerment of the Iranians, all because of one thing, a reckless phone call by the President of the United States to Erdogan. A phone call that gave a green light to Erdogan, who was waiting for the moment when he could do the popular thing in Turkish politics and attack the Kurds across the border, regardless of the consequences. That reckless phone call by the President is what precipitated this crisis, which we now see today in Syria and the death of innocent people. The thing that I want to add to it as well is something that we cannot and should never overlook. The thought that they would release thousands of ISIS terrorists who were in captivity and being held because of our Kurdish allies is a threat not only to the Middle East, it's a threat to Europe and even to the United States. We are demanding on the Democratic side a full accounting from our counter-terrorist agencies as to what has happened with these ISIS terrorists who have been released because of the President's reckless phone call green-lighting Erdogan's invasion of Syria. And let me say a word, if I might, about an issue that came up earlier with our Republican colleagues. They were trying to place a finger of blame on who has slowed down the action and business of the United States Congress. Questions asked, why? It must be impeachment that slowed down the activity of a great chamber like the United States Senate. Well, those of us who serve here know better. We know what's happened in this year with the House Democrats that passed almost 200 pieces of substantive legislation, sending them to the Senate where they died in Senator McConnell's graveyard. If you're looking for the obstacle to progress in the Senate, it's not impeachment, it's Senator M. McConnell. And what he's done for issues like reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act, stopped by Senator McConnell, closing gaps and loopholes in our gun background check system by Senator McConnell, protecting Americans with pre-existing conditions in their health care, stopped by Senator McConnell, addressing discriminatory pay practices, protecting LGBTQ Americans from discrimination. All of these measures passed the House of Representatives and die because Senator McConnell refuses to bring them to the floor. Don't blame impeachment, blame Senator M. McConnell.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Murray.
Well, thank you. Make no mistake, even before the impeachment inquiry began, Leader McConnell and Senate Republicans had made it abundantly clear they didn't want to get anything done. Well, Democrats aren't taking no for an answer. As the impeachment inquiry in the House continues, Democrats will continue to push to pass common sense solutions to challenges families across our country are facing. And those challenges are real and they are serious. For example, any day now, a decision could come down in the partisan Republican lawsuit that President Trump and Republicans brought, which threatens to strike down protections for patients with pre-existing conditions and strip away health care from families across the country. Democrats in the House and Senate have repeatedly made clear we want to protect patients from this decision, and we have asked Republicans to join us to make sure that happens. So far, Republicans have refused. Democrats in the Senate have introduced legislation to bring down drug prices through impactful steps like Medicare negotiation and to protect patients with pre-existing conditions. And in the House, Democrats have passed legislation to restore funding President Trump cut to help people find the right care for themselves and to reverse President Trump's junk insurance rule, which gave companies more power to sell junk plans that flout patient protection. Any of those policies would make a real difference for people in my state and across the country, and we're going to keep doing everything we can to get them across the finish line. In fact, soon we are going to be able to force a vote, in spite of Leader McConnell's obstruction, to overturn President Trump's rule encouraging states to promote those junk insurance plans and water down protections for people with pre-existing conditions. And we're not going to stop there. I think people across the country are seeing a pretty stark difference between Democrats and Republicans in Congress right now. Democrats are showing that we can both investigate and legislate. Republicans are refusing to do either. Democrats are working hard to do every part of our job that our constituents sent us here to do, and Republicans don't want to seem to do anything except stand in the way. I hope that changes because there is a lot at stake for families in this country today. Thank you.
Senator Scott.
Let's be clear that none of us ran for the United States Senate because we wanted to be involved in an impeachment of a president of the United States or never-ending struggles about his abuses of power. The people of our state sent us here to solve problems, to affect their lives, to make the quality of their families' lives better. And we know we have a responsibility to investigate, to hold this White House accountable, but we also are committed to legislating and solving problems. We know, we as Democrats are committed to doing both. And that's what we need the Senate Republican majority to be willing to do. Today, up to 1.5 million American workers and retirees are in pension plans that are in serious risk of becoming insolvent in the next 20 years. So folks have paid in, they took a lesser pay raise to pay into a pension for their families, and we are now in a situation where people in Michigan and across the country are seeing 50% cuts in their income, 60%, 70%. And we understand that in America, a pension is a promise. It should be kept. And we are laser focused on that. We know that in the financial crisis, while the banks were being bailed out, American workers lost $2.4 trillion in their 401ks and IRAs alone, not counting losing about 25% of their pensions. So this is real, this is serious, and why aren't they a priority? They are a priority for us and for the Democratic House. It's now been 84 days since the Democratic majority in the House of Representatives passed legislation to help these families. 84 days, and 286 days since the House passed the American Minors Act to protect pensions and health care for minors, retirees, and their families. Now, this is before impeachment was being talked about. They could have acted 84 days ago. They could have acted certainly 286 days ago, but Leader McConnell chose not to. And they're not the only ones waiting. Gun safety legislation has been sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk for 231 days. Another shooting a couple of days ago. American families continue to be shattered by gun violence. 231 days ago, the House acted. Election security has been sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk for 111 days. No action. Legislation to protect people with pre-existing conditions and health care on Mitch McConnell's desk for 160 days. No action. We have had climate crisis legislation sitting on his desk, 167 days. And the Violence Against Women Act has been sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk for 195 days, and that's just a few of those items. So if they want to lament that we need to act, today they said they were waiting for the House. We don't have to wait for the House. The House has acted and acted and acted to place into the Senate things that are critically important to improve the lives of American families. The American people want the United States Senate to do our jobs. Democrats are ready, willing, and able. What is Mitch McConnell waiting for?
Senator Carter.
Tomorrow, on the floor of the United States Senate, we'll have the chance to stand up for public health and for our environment. The Congressional Review Act resolution that I followed would reverse what President Trump has done in canceling the Clean Power Plan that was promulgated in 2015. Let me just go back to the 1990s when we passed the amendments to the Clean Air Act. It was passed by strong bipartisan votes in both the House and the Senate, signed by President George Herbert Walker Bush. There was strong support for clean air. The Supreme Court held that indeed EPA has the responsibilities to regulate carbon, and that's exactly what was done in 2015 under the previous administration. The plan was a real plan to reduce harmful carbon emissions into our air. It would make significant reductions based upon best science, but it left it up to the states to determine how to do that with the mix of power plants that they have. It made sense, it was supported, and it was being implemented. This rule would reverse that. Instead, we would have the dirty power plant rule. It will very much add to the carbon problems in our community. It takes away from state governments the ability to use a mix in order to reach their goals, including using natural gas and renewable sources. It is an affront to federalism, and it will not protect our environment and will not protect public health. I would urge my colleagues, this is our opportunity to stand up for clean air and stand up for our environment.
Thank you, Ben. As we were speaking, the vote came in the House on our resolution demanding that President Trump reverse course, protect the Kurds, come up with a comprehensive plan to protect us from ISIS. The vote was 354 to 60. All 225 Democrats who voted for it. A majority of the GOP voted for it, 129 yes, 60 no. This legislation, the repudiation of President Trump's act, clear repudiation. We urge Leader McConnell to put the same resolution introduced by Senators Menendez and Young, bipartisan, on the floor, and it will go to President Trump. There is no better way to put pressure on him, because the fate of the Kurds, and in many ways the fate of the safety of the United States, is in President Trump's hands. Questions?
House Republicans are characterizing the impeachment inquiry as unfair, kangaroo court. I'm sure you've heard. I want to get your reflections on how do you think that process is playing out? How do you think the American people are viewing it? Do you think that it would strengthen Democrats' case if the process was more transparent?
Well, I think they're doing a very good job. I support Speaker Pelosi. As you heard here at the podium, when you ask Republicans, was influencing asking a foreign country to influence our elections, was it right or wrong? They're so afraid to say this, so they sort of rush to the refuge of bogus procedural claims.
Schumer, you mentioned the Senate trial, and you tried to have this in fair fashion. In 1999, it was law, and Daschle got together and worked something out. Has there been any conversation that you had with McConnell about the structure?
Zero.
Do you think that that would be true to have such a conversation?
Yes.
And what would you like to see?
Well, I think I'm not.
Reflect what Lott and Daschle did?
I'm not urging him to do it immediately. We have to wait and see what the Senate does, but we hope that the House does, rather. But we have to do this in a fair trial, in a fair and bipartisan way, and I hope that Leader McConnell would obey those strictures.
You like what they did in 99 with Lott and Daschle?
I haven't studied all the details of 99, but I hope it's fair and bipartisan.
Commissioner, McConnell's criticized you and other 2020 Democrats for voting against his resolution earlier this year that the premature withdrawal of troops from Syria. Do you regret that vote? Or what's your response?
I don't know which. I think that the vote he's referring to, I think I voted on the other side. Yeah, I think there were 70 Democrats who voted for it, 30 against it. I was one of the 7. Or 7 senators voted for it, 30 against it. I was one who voted for it. Yeah. I think that's the one you're referring to.
Not just your party, but the Republicans as well, referring to the Kurds as if they were some monolithic entity. In fact, there are about 8 different political parties there, Kurdish political parties who are oftentimes at odds with one another. They've been seeking a homeland since the Ottoman Empire, since the 1920s. And at what point would you suggest that U.S. troops ultimately get out of that region?
Well, the bottom line is this is not a question. There was a small number of troops that protected a large number of Kurds, not just in Kurdish interests, but in the United States interests. The Kurds were leading the charge against ISIS, which is dedicated to damaging America, killing Americans, and damaging our homeland. So it's not a question of the Kurd homeland, it's a question right now of the Kurds being our allies, probably the best allies other than Israel that we've had in the region, and turning our back on them is a very, very bad thing for the Kurds, for the safety of America, and what does it say to others who might want to make alliances with America?
How would you characterize, on impeachment with the Syria business, how would you characterize on 2 topics, how things are looking as far as the appropriations process, and then also on the USMCA trade accord? Perhaps you saw Richard Trump downplay the ideas of the vote sometime before Thanksgiving.
On the first one, on the appropriations, look, we want to come to a bipartisan agreement. We came to a broad general agreement on the 302As. And we're waiting for our Republican friends to start negotiating with us on the 302Bs, not to jam something down our throat, which takes $5 billion out of some of the programs we care about, opioids and health care, kinds of things that Ranking Member Murray has worked on, and putting it into building a wall. They know that's not going to happen. The disappointment we have is over the last 2 weeks, they really haven't started negotiating in a serious way yet. On USMCA, I think the position of our caucus is pretty united, not completely, but pretty united, that we need strong enforcement of the labor protections. The labor protections in USMCA are better than NAFTA, better than other treaties. But if they're not enforced, what good are they? We need strong protections there, and we're in agreement with the House and the Speaker on that issue. Thank you, everybody. Okay, we'll give you the next one.
What is your understanding of the meeting of White House today will entail, and what are you expecting?
Well, the President requested it, and we're going to make a strong case that he's got to fix the mess up that he made, the huge, damaging mess that he made.
Any?
Good afternoon. We just came from a most unsatisfactory meeting at the White House. The meeting started by the president saying he never invited any of us there. We asked for the meeting, and without even going into that. As Speaker of the House, I reported to the president that shortly before the meeting, we had a vote in the Congress, 354 to 60, opposing his actions that he took in Syria, calling upon the Turks to exercise restraint, asking us to have humanitarian assistance to the Kurds, especially the children and the rest of that, as well as, most importantly, asking the president what his plan was to fight ISIS now that he had disrupted what was going on in Syria. He couldn't handle it. He just couldn't handle it. But 2-1, the Republicans voted to oppose what he was doing in Syria. He just couldn't handle it, so he kind of engaged in a meltdown, and we were trying to get the answer. What is your clear plan that this resolution asked for how we fight ISIS? It was very sad. It was very sad. Mr. Blair, did you want to say
Well, we have obviously a crisis. We had a resolution that said the policy that we are pursuing and that was taken was not agreed to by an overwhelming vote of the House of Representatives. We needed a reasonable, rational discussion between the President and the co-equal branch of government, the House and the Senate. Unfortunately, the President came in, to my observation, angry and defensive. And frankly, it got worse from there. We did have an explanation of what was being executed, but we had no response to the Speaker and the Majority Leader Schumer's question, what is our plan from here? At that point in time, the meeting very shortly thereafter deteriorated into a very disrespectful assertion about the Speaker of the House, who is, after all, third in line to be President of the United States and heads up the Congress of the Congress. It was obvious that the meeting was going to get angrier and more defensive, and we felt that the meeting was no longer a meeting in which we thought we would get useful discussion and results, and so we left. But it is sad for our country that at a time of crisis, the President, who said, first of all, he didn't invite us, we didn't invite ourselves, and we didn't ask for the meeting. As I understand, the Speaker did ask for a briefing of all the members, Republicans and Democrats, of what had happened and was happening. Rather, we were invited down to the White House, and although he did not walk out, as he did in a meeting that we had on infrastructure, in which, as you recall, we came out of the first meeting on infrastructure in a very positive mode, saying the President and the Democrats had a very positive meeting about infrastructure. Unfortunately, this was not a positive meeting. Unfortunately, at a time of crisis, the President chose to be derogatory and accusatory, and it was unfortunate for the country.
What's really sad about it is I pray for the President all the time, and I tell him that. I pray for his safety and that of his family. I think now we have to pray for his health, because this was a very serious meltdown on the part of the President. I expressed my appreciation for what our troops have done in Syria, and by all accounts from the generals, they have just really done the job very well that he's now pulling out. The explanation for that is what we asked for all members of the House to hear, and that was supposed to be tomorrow, but now they somehow postponed it today. My concern that I expressed to the President is that Russia has for a long time always wanted to have a foothold in the Middle East, and now he has enabled that to happen. And I have concerns about all roads leading to Putin, whether it's a foothold in the Middle East, whether it's placing in doubt any military assistance to Ukraine, which is to the benefit of Putin, whether it's placing in doubt our commitment to NATO, Article 5. which again, all roads lead to Putin. The list goes on and on. That seemed to have angered the president. But in any event, this is very serious. ISIS, the protection of our homeland, that's an oath we take to protect and defend. This is very serious, and it was very sad that I think probably the president couldn't handle the fact that the vote was so overwhelming in opposition to his what he did in Syria, and again, not being able to give us a clear picture of what his plan was to protect us from ISIS.
Madam Speaker, when you say that, you said that you pray for his health now in the aftermath of what you're calling a meltdown. Are you suggesting that he's mentally unwell in any way?
I'm not talking about mentally. I'm just talking about handling the truth.
Madam Speaker, the most powerful tool that Congress has is the power of the purse. We have to fund the government by middle of November here. Would you foresee, and why wouldn't you put some restrictions in an appropriations bill to reverse the policy and mandate that those troops go back? Wouldn't that be the automatic solution?
I don't think that is a possibility.
Why not?
That's harder than you might think. The president is the commander-in-chief. The decisions that are made, hopefully, are made with the concurrence of the Department of Defense and our men and women there. This is what the president did was dangerous. And again, we have not only troops there, but equipment there and the rest. I don't know if he understood the situation, but I don't think that that's something you can deal with in an appropriation.
Let me just say, Jen, we worked very hard to open up the government. It was shut down when the Republicans were in charge, and most of the government agencies were closed. We are prepared to cooperate with the administration and with our Republican colleagues to ensure that the government is funded and serving the American people and defending the American people. And as you know, we passed 96% of government funding to the Senate. The Senate has not passed any appropriation bill. We're concerned about that, but we're going to work very hard between now and November 21st, and thereafter, if necessary, I hope it's not necessary, to get agreement so that the government can be operational. The American people expect that, and that is our duty.
Madam Speaker, did the president bring up impeachment at all, and do you think that factored into his behavior towards you?
He did not. I don't know what got interested into his behavior, but that was not a subject that was brought up at all. No.
Madam Speaker, Leader McCarthy came to the mics after you folks left and said that after you left, there were some Democrats who remained, and he described the meeting after you left as productive. And also, by the way, saying somehow that you managed to make the meeting political and more about the way you and the leadership were being treated.
Well, maybe that's what he thought when I said that the House of Representatives voted for 354 to 60 against the president's policy. Maybe he considers that political, but I don't have any intention of spending any time on anything that Mr. McCarthy said.
I work closely with Mr. McCarthy, and I try to be constructive, and I think many times he tries to be constructive. But I don't consider him an objective source of information on President Trump.
What does this mean? What does Trump's behavior towards you mean for working together with him on USMCA and drug pricing and other things? Can you still work with him?
It's not important in that regard. We will do what we need to do for the good of the American people, and that has nothing to do with him. There may be some collateral benefit to him when we successfully achieve some things for the American people. But there's no reason not to do it because there's collateral benefit to him. And again, we're here for the American people. We're not here measuring what we do as to what it means to him.
Is there any doubt in your mind that the House will be...
Do you think future meetings with the president are no longer necessary because of the way that these meetings have blown up in the past?
Well, we were invited to a meeting at the White House, and the president immediately started off by saying that we asked for the meeting, which we had not. But, you know, that's a minor thing. It was not a particularly hospitable opening to the meeting, but who cares? Who cares? What matters is the president made a very dangerous decision when it came to Syria and the Turks and the Kurds, and without much understanding of what was at risk there. 354 members of the House concurred, that they did not, they opposed the president's decision, I think it rattled him.
Is there any doubt that the House will impeach? Is there any doubt the House will impeach the president at this point?
That's a different conversation that will go down the path where truth takes us, and then when that decision is made, but that hasn't been made, and I'm not even going there. These are two different conversations. And I disagree with the policy of the President of the United States. That is a matter to have the debate. That's the civic debate that we would have. And that's a matter for the elections.
Madam Speaker.
Impeachment is a completely different subject.
And what did the president say that got this meeting on the wrong foot? Leader Schumer said he called you a third-rate politician. He said you were sympathetic.
Grade.
A third grade. Thank you for clarifying.
Grade. And I said, I wish you were a politician.
What did he say that made clear that this was not going to be a productive meeting?
That was not. The fact is that we were trying to have a factual basis, a calm factual basis about the security of our country. There were certain, shall we say,
there were a number of things that the president said which were obviously meant to be derogatory towards the Democrats generally, and President Obama in particular, that were not conducive to any sort of rational, reasonable discussion about a crisis that confronts the country of the president's making. So the meeting went downhill relatively quickly, unfortunately, from our perspective.
Referring to President Obama's policy in Syria or more generally?
I don't want to get into the specifics, but it became a derogatory meeting from the president's side, and that it went downhill.
I just might close by saying this. I think it's a very sad commentary on the President of the United States that he doesn't have enough confidence in what he is doing to listen to other points of view, especially the overwhelming vote of the House of Representatives, and have some level of respect for that. And again, it shook him up, melted him down, and he behaved accordingly. Does that mean we can't have future meetings? No. Just depends on the subject, I guess. Does it mean we can't pass things that working together? If we can, we will. Because it is a collateral benefit to him, will never be a deterrent for us to do what is right for the American people. But there has to be some level of values, of calmness, of patriotism, a love of our country and our system, and not a personal invective because he didn't like the way a vote went on any given day.
It was mentioned.
Now, as I said, I want to end where I began. We praised our troops and the wonderful work that they have done, all just very praiseworthy, always. But again, in this particular instance, we documented how well they have protected the American people from ISIS, and so we thank them for that. And I conveyed that to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, as well as to the Secretary of Defense. But the fact is also that the President said, I promised to bring the troops home, and that's what I'm doing. My comment is home, Saudi Arabia. Now we're sending troops to Saudi Arabia. What's that about? Because he doesn't like to have to answer questions of that kind.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Great, thank you all.
Thank you all.
Oh, gosh, okay. Yeah, there's the pool. Hey, there's a pool mic.
palabras estén dedicadas a los miembros de las fuerzas y cuerpos de seguridad del Estado, a los hombres y a las mujeres del Cuerpo Nacional de Policía, de la Guardia Civil, de los Mossos de Escuadra, que en estos días y a esta misma hora, con extraordinaria profesionalidad, pero también con una enorme presión en su trabajo, están trabajando para proteger los derechos y las libertades constitucionales en Cataluña. En nombre de toda la sociedad española, deseo trasladarles el reconocimiento y la gratitud por su indispensable labor en la defensa de la legalidad constitucional y también estatutaria en Cataluña, y junto a ese reconocimiento y a esa gratitud, el deseo de la pronta recuperación de aquellos miembros de las fuerzas y cuerpos de seguridad del Estado y también de los Mossos de Escuadra.
esquina! ¡Están cogiendo piedras! Eso es, ahí están cogiendo piedras. Més enrere, sisplau, home. Vale, en aquella zona allí están cogiendo piedras, ¿eh? ¿Listo? Vale, ¿preparado? Abrimos un poco. que han dicho 50 veces ya, tirar para atrás. Sortiu d'aquí, sisplau! Vale?
Hay gente ahí.
¿Cuándo? ¿Ya?
Prevenidos ya.
¿Cuándo?
Ya.
¿Pero ya?
Nada, pintores nada, pintores no hacen nada. Nada, pintores con un chiviazo,
¿Estás transmitiendo? ¿Eh? No.
Nada más de sitio. Dale más vueltas ahí en la manivela, ponla a tope, coño, a ver.
Se volvió todo el mundo loco ya aquí. Ostras. Yo estoy haciendo live. No, estoy haciendo con el teléfono. Cuidado. Van a tener que solucionar esto de alguna manera. Esta es foto de control ya. Es que hoy ya no sé si los de mi pasar ni como ayer. Ya tienen que hacer algo, lo que sea. Oye.
Agua desde los balcones.
estar con nosotros también con México, con Venezuela. Algunos países están intentando dar algo de
¡Hala! El depósito, cuidado, ¡Ostras!
Sé que no viene a
He estado hablando, hay más gente que entiende libertad allí. Se lo puedo decir. El de superhéroes de esta noche se mueve, porque se acude unas imágenes al lado. Sí, lo he visto, lo he visto. O sea, vi fritar tanques ahí. Qué putada, los coches llevan, para tu coche bajo la mañana y te cuenta esto. La seguridad y el orden interior es una responsabilidad. Pero ahí se ve que no estás al día cuando pides un 135. Intervenir la Generalitat, no para intervenir la casa de Toxicón. Puedes conectarte ya, fíjate, porque así yo ya me desconecto aquí.
¡Ambulancia!
¿Puedes transmitir o no?
¿Dejas que lo juegue o...?
Germán. ¿Y? Ok. Germán. Ven. Tú debes estar o pásame, tienes esto y me pasas tu móvil y me llamas a Renata, por favor. Porque me está mandando un mensaje por acá y no dejo contestar.
No, porque...
Bien,
Exactly.
¿Sabéis qué han hecho?
Okay, so okay. Do you want me to wait for you here or to go there towards the Triumph? We are in once at the petrol station, one street from your house. Okay, but things are, getting a little boring here now. Yeah. There's a little fire there. I'm gonna move there with. Can you please just in case check with Natasha that they are seeing me, because I've received nothing from them. Maybe I'm doing all this for nothing. Yeah. Okay. Cheers. Germán, ciérramelo, que ahora y déjamelo tener porque me está por llamar. Quiere la tarjeta con lo que tengas grabado. Para no nos encontramos aquí. Ella está viniendo. No, simplemente para que me lo salga. O que tengo. No entendí. Me está por llamar en un minuto. ¿Y me cenará?
please welcome to the stage Scott County Auditor and Elections Commissioner Roxana Moritz.
I had to bring little notes. It's been a little busy in Davenport the last few days, if any of you didn't know. Oh, so sorry. I said I had to bring a few little notes because anybody that lives in Davenport knows it's been a few busy days for us at the auditor's office. Oh, no. Let's see. Are they direct mics? There you go. It's a direct mic. Yay! Well, first I want to say how grateful I am that I live in a state of Iowa where we have the great opportunity to see and visit with presidential candidates. Not only that, but we live in a country that gives us the freedoms to listen, to watch, and more importantly, to vote for someone that will bring us hope and hopefully bring back some democracy to what we call the President of the United States of America. I know several of you people that are here that work with me or that are union members or that are friends, and most of you know that I'm not a very rah-rah kind of person. I tend to be a little more serious-minded, and I think that we're in serious times. I think each one of us should just take a moment and reflect about where you are and how you feel about the country as it sits today and where we are in relationship to our relationships with other foreign countries. Right now, the United States is no longer respected by our other foreign leaders. We no longer have their backs. We have turned our backs on counties and other countries and allies, even men and women that have worked and fought alongside of each and every one of us. These countries used to look to us, to the United States, to set the standard. We were the standard, and we should continue to be that standard. But sadly enough, they're embarrassed to say that they are, and we should be embarrassed as well. Why are we here today? I can tell you we're here for more than one reason, no more than one reason, and that's that we have someone that's ready to be a leader, who's ready to command, and who's ready to bring all of us together. And with those two processes working together, we might actually get something done. What do you think? And when you put it in perspective to what we're looking at right now, President Trump, it's absolutely clear to me, and it should be absolutely clear to you, that the leadership that we need in this country is Vice President Joe Biden. Vice President Joe Biden has earned our trust. He's someone that will bring back not only the dignity, but the civility that's most important not only to each and every one of us, but to this country and to the presidency of the United States. He will and can rebuild those broken relationships with not only our allies, but with each and every one of us to make sure that we feel like we live in a safe place. One of the most important things, and if you listened to the debate last night, which I really hope that you did, you heard from him in his closing remarks. If it isn't the most, it should be one of the most important things, is that Vice President Biden will be ready on day one. Our nation was founded on democracy, and I had to look that up a week ago. I was doing a Facebook post about democracy, and I was so disappointed when I read what it meant because of our presidency. Democracy is the opportunity for us to elect fair representation. And through that fair representation, it's important to understand that after we represent that representation, they are accountable to us. They're obligated to us. It's their duty to us. And I'm not sure that we have that right now. I'm proud to stand and walk today and every day until February and then into November alongside and moving forward with Joe Biden. And I know he has what it'll take for America to be restored and for the reputation to be brought back that each and every one of us want to see in this country for us and for our country. And with that, I bring forward our next President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Hello, folks. How are you? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Folks, Roxana and I have known each other a while, and I have to tell you, she's right about how she's serious. It means a great deal to me. After this time, she would endorse me, and I mean it sincerely. It means a lot. And I've got a great friend who, as we keep in touch with one another, and we lost one of our good friends, Doc, when he passed away, but Jim Lycombe, where are you, Jimmy? You're somewhere in here. There you are. Jim, thank you. You know, and Mayor Bill Gluba, excuse me, as you know, I know you know this because a lot of you have been involved in politics for a while. But you know, one of the things that is one of the great honors, as much of a repetition running for president is and going all over the country and talk about how tough it is, the thing that people don't realize is you end up in the process making friends for life. You make friends for life. No matter whether you win, lose, or what happens, you become friends for life. And so the folks I just named have been friends, and they know, Roxanne and I were just talking about, we shared a lousy occurrence on the same day. She lost her husband, I lost my son. But we knew about each other. We cared what was happening to the other person, not just to ourselves. And a lot of the people in this room were, excused, as we used to say in the Senate, a point of personal privilege, so good to my son, Bo, my son, Hunter. I mean, you really were. You reached out. You embraced him. And I know some of you know, I won't mention the gentleman's name, but I was on the other side of the state, good guy, haven't seen him in a long time, walked up and said, Joe, I'm still for you, but he said, I would rather have been able to vote for your son for president, but I'm going to vote for you. You know, my dad used to have an expression. He'd say, Mr. Mayor, he'd say, you know your success as a father when you turn to look at your child and realize they turned out better than you. The way you embraced my son, the way you embraced me when things happened, and like you embraced Roxana when she lost her husband, means a lot. I didn't plan on saying any of this at the outset, but I look out at so many familiar faces. And, you know, to have Cindy Winkler here, state representative, I want to thank her for being here and all the roles, of all the roles the President of the United States has to fill. There is one that is more consequential than any other role, and that's to be Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America, the United States military. It's a sacred duty. It's not something that is done or looked at in a whim. And so I hope you understand, I think it's important that I make a serious speech. It's going to take about 25 minutes for me to do it, about American foreign policy and why I am so concerned about our security and the deployment of the might of the United States military. You know, the power to deploy the might of the most powerful military in the history of the world, and that's not hyperbole, in the history of the world, there have never been greater or more competent warriors or a larger or more powerful military than we have. It is not an ego booster. It's not a ratings booster. You take an oath of office to serve and swear responsibility, A, to our troops and their families. Only sacred obligation we have a lot of obligation, only sacred one, is to to protect those we send to war, care for them to make them home, and care for their families while they're gone. They risk their lives so their government will actually be able to work. Another responsibility is that we not risk their lives pointlessly, that when a commander-in-chief puts them in harm's way, it's for an overwhelming national security purpose. We also, that commander-in-chief has a responsibility to our allies and to our partners, that the United States of America will stand by its word and stand with our allies in times of need. And that our adversaries know that the United States seeks peace, but it will not hesitate to defend our national interest or the interests of those we've sworn in sacred alliances to work with by misuse of others. Donald Trump, I believe is, and it's not comfortable to say this about a president, but he is a complete failure as commander-in-chief. It is most reckless and incompetent commander-in-chief we have ever had. And he's failed repeatedly. You know, he doesn't understand. Part of it is he's just incompetent. No, I really mean it. He's just incompetent. But he repeatedly fails to foresee the consequences of his impulses. And they're impulses that he has, not based on any theory. And when the utterly predictable occurs, he seems not to care. He blames somebody else. It's always somebody else's fault. The buck never stops at his desk, in his view. Talks with North Korea collapsing because they were based on nothing more than a delusional promise by a bloody dictator, which he was prepared to accept. Erratic trade war with China caused huge pain, including here in Iowa. 160 workers in the Quad City laid off indefinitely at Deere. Not to mention the pain it's caused for manufacturing, with virtually no gain at all in the strategy. Iran, growing more and more provocative, restarting its nuclear program, because Donald Trump chose to renege on a diplomatic agreement with the world powers, including our allies, on an agreement that was working. It was the most intensive regime in being able to know what someone was doing, an inspection, than ever has occurred in modern history. And now, Turkish forces invading and attacking our Kurdish allies, partners, because Donald Trump tweeted their withdrawal. According to Admiral Stratovides, our former head of naval operations, he went on to say that without any notification to the military. The events of this past week have brought Syria, that he's initiated in Syria, have had devastating clarity on just how dangerous this president is to our national security, to our leadership around the world, and to the lives of the brave women and men serving in uniform. You know, building and maintaining the confidence of our allies has been a critical element that every single president has engaged in, Democrat and Republican, some with more or less success, since the end of World War II. But by precipitously withdrawing a small number of American special forces in Syria, Trump managed in one fell swoop to betray our Kurdish partners who helped defeat ISIS, to create a humanitarian crisis with innocent civilians and ethnic and religious minority communities caught in the crossfire, with up to 160,000 newly displaced persons run out of their homes. Forcing our troops into retreat. The thousands of troops, they're in retreat. The United States military is in retreat from Turkey. Russia and the murderous Assad regime is flowing in to fill the vacuum. He's given ISIS, formerly Al-Qaeda, a new lease on life by forcing the Kurds to leave from continuing to fight ISIS and hold the 10,000 ISIS prisoners they have and flee north to try to protect their sons, their daughters, their families. Instead of fighting the remnants of the so-called caliphate, what ISIS had set up, and leaving guarding 10,000 ISIS terrorists and supporters, some of whom have already escaped, and to throw the global confidence in American leadership into complete freefall. I'm going to say something very self-serving. This is something I know a lot about. I spent a lot of time in that area. I know all of these leaders. I've been engaged because that was my job as chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee and doing major national security and intelligence matters for President Obama. All the consequences I've mentioned, every single one can be laid at the feet of Donald Trump. You know, he green-lighted Turkey's invasion. Now he's left asking Turkey to stop it. But the damage is done. You don't get do-overs when it comes to national security. The decisions have deadly, serious consequences. And yet the dynamics in Syria are incredibly complicated. And yes, the conflict between Turkey and the Kurds dates back decades. Decades. But before Trump's tweet, a very small number of U.S. forces working together with our Kurdish partners was actually keeping northern Iraq relatively stable. People weren't dying, while keeping the pressure on what was left of ISIS. Now, they've been blown apart. Imagine how demoralizing it is to the troops, our troops, as Russia pours in mercenaries, taking literally victory laps inside of former U.S. camps and facilities. And President Trump ordered them, that the very ones President Trump ordered them to abandon. And Turkey attacking the very people they fought alongside of. That's why we need someone in the Oval Office who understands the gravity and the consequences of their decisions. Trump's quote, his great unmatched wisdom, end of quote. My God, what a delusional man. No, I mean, his great unmatched wisdom. That great unmatched wisdom has undone the hard-won progress across 2 administrations in a matter of days, including our fight against ISIS in Syria. As I said, as retired admiral said, he quote, everyone was absolutely flabbergasted. He went on to say, in the Pentagon and throughout. Our military did not sign on to this. Republicans in Congress know how irresponsible this is. It's about the only thing they've mustered enough backbone to criticize him on. You know, that's how outrageous it is. Even Mitch McConnell knows he's wrong. I mean, think about it. Lindsey Graham, who used to be a friend of John McCain and mine and others, is now being attacked by Trump again. Trump tried to justify his decision to abandon the Kurds and our Kurdish partners by making the absolutely ridiculous, uninformed, crazy comment: they didn't help us in the Second World War. They didn't help us in Normandy. I mean, can you believe it? No, I mean, when you think about it, what a global embarrassment. Well, guess what? They helped us smash ISIS, a direct threat to the United States of America and our friends all around the world. And that didn't happen during World War II, but some of it happened during Trump's first term. You know, you'd think he'd remember. He bragged about it at the time. He said the Kurds stood with us to accomplish a vital national security objective of the United States. He goes on to point out the destruction of ISIS and their temporary caliphate. Talked about it. He said, we achieved this without sending tens of thousands of troops, without spending $250 billion as we did in the Iraq surge. Indeed, the Obama-Biden administration worked with and alongside our partners in Syria, the Kurds, the Syrian Democratic Forces, with just a few hundred Americans, stopping tens of thousands of local fighters to take the fight to ISIS on the ground. The strategy is so successful, it turned out that Trump's secret plan to defeat ISIS, remember that? Secret plan to defeat ISIS was just to keep doing what we had put in place until last week. You know, those brave Kurdish and Arab forces paid a steep price. In defeating ISIS in the Caliphate, they lost over 10,000 soldiers. Hear me? 10,000. 10,000 dead. They made the ultimate sacrifice. And then Trump sold them out. All it took was one phone call from the president of Turkey, who I know very well. So now, instead of being a reliable American partner, helping to maintain stability and keeping the lid on terrorism, the Kurds have had to make the only Faustian bargain they could make to avoid being wiped out and their women and children being wiped out by the onslaught of the Turkey military. They made a deal with two devils, Bashir Assad, a murderer who heads up the government of Syria, and Vladimir Putin, for their protection. That's the deal they made. That's the president. He always calls when I get to this part. I'm joking. That's not a problem. It happens. Look, they've now handed over to those two people control of northwest Syria, back to the brutal Russian and Iranian-backed regimes. And I say Iranian-backed regime. How does this keep America safe? How does it advance our interest around the world? The answer is quite simple. It doesn't. It devastates us. You know, how does it benefit anyone other than our adversaries? Russia, which is now at the table to further expand its influence throughout Syria, encourage Iran to be more engaged on the western shore, eastern shore of the Mediterranean. Russia again, which gets to sit back and watch one NATO ally impose a sanction on another NATO ally, furthering Putin's goal of fracturing the NATO alliance. That's what Putin's about. Iran and Hezbollah now are going to be more emboldened to use Syria to launch attacks against Israel from the Golan and other places. ISIS, which has clearly seen it regroup and now has hundreds of supporters released back into the region. Every single strongman, autocrat and dictator around the world who's just learned what President Trump has done, that we'll abandon our partners under the smallest amount of pressure. What do you think they're going to do? What do you think they'll attempt to do now? All we're left with is a Donald Trump-shaped hole in American credibility. More chaos, more instability, more threats to the American people, our partners, and our allies in the region. When it was pointed out, these people will flee, ISIS will flee to Europe, along with all those people displaced. What was his comment? Don't worry, they'll go to Europe, they won't come to the United States. That's being a real partner, isn't it? They're going to go to Europe, it's okay. They'll take care of them, the Europeans. Don't be fooled by Trump's argument that he's pulling U.S. troops out of the Middle East, by the way, or ending the forever wars. He may have caved to Erdogan and to Putin, forcing our troops in retreat under fire, but he's also authorized the deployment of thousands of additional troops into the Gulf and Saudi Arabia to deal with another crisis of his making, the one with Iran. But this time, the crisis we have to deal with in Iran, we have to go it alone. None of our partners want in on the deal. America, you caused the problem. You deal with the Quds force. You deal with the terrorists coming out of Iran, not us. So don't believe Trump's con here. This is not American leadership. This is bending to the will of a strongman. And this is not an end of forever wars. It's a recipe for more forever wars. He's still more than a year in office. God forbid us, 4 years after that. Look, as erratic as he becomes, the more he's certain that I'm going to beat him like a drum, look what he's doing. No, really. No, but think about it. Have you ever heard of a time, do you ever think you'd see a time when they're spending $10 million on ads this far out in a other party's primary to try to pick who the candidate's going to be? There's a reason for it. Over 70, can you turn that off, please? Over 70 polls in a row show me defeating him. I become the new object of his attention. Maybe the reason why he's going to be impeached. Imagine what damage he could do in the time he has left, either intentionally or because of his total incompetence. The more under pressure he is, the more erratic things he does. Things that even for him are worrisome. We can't let that happen. I'm not going to let it happen. Folks, the next president is going to face enormous challenges of picking up the pieces of American foreign policy, salvaging our reputation, and rebuilding confidence in the comments made by the United States around the world. It used to be what we say we do. We keep our word. The next president is going to have to address the world as he or she finds it on January 2021. Whatever the state of disarray Trump leaves it in. And there's not going to be time for building relationships from scratch. We're going to need a leader who can, on day one, pick up the telephone, call our NATO allies, know them by their first names, and know and have them know there'll be no question about the word of the next president of the United States. None. And that the United States will maintain our treaty obligations, will stand by democracy and freedom. I personally met and built relationships with almost every single world leader that's still on the stage. I've negotiated with Erdogan. I know how he operates. I've spent more time with him alone, I predict, I believe, than the president has. In fact, the reason the United States partnered with the Kurdish militia in Syria in the first place is because Turkey dragged its heels on helping us defeat ISIS. Remember all the people that were led in across the border from Europe to go to fight with ISIS? The Turkish border? I spent hours with my security team and going over proposals with Erdogan. He wanted us to leverage, in order to deal with our concern over ISIS and the rest of the world, he wanted us essentially to declare war and send hundreds of thousands of troops into Syria to take down Assad. And we would not do that. The Syrian government, which neither our administration or the American people wanted to have another endless war, in fact, occur. So unlike President Trump, the president gave me the authority to tell Erdogan no. But we kept working with Turkey, helping them to cope with millions of Syrian refugees who were fleeing out of Syria. Designed as much humanitarian aid as we could to alleviate much of the suffering as possible, while also welcoming those fleeing violence to our shores. And we put in place a successful strategy for the Kurds to ultimately bring down ISIS while preventing Turkey and the Kurds from coming to blows. We shouldn't fool ourselves, folks. There may never be a solution in Syria that suffices and satisfies our best hope for a region of peace within itself. No one wants American troops to be forever embroiled in conflict in the Middle East or nation building. There's a big difference between sending tens of thousands of troops, combat troops, to the Middle East indefinitely, which I oppose and will end, and using small numbers of special operators to support local forces doing the fighting and advancing our common interest. I have to tell you, I was surprised last night in the debate. One of my colleagues said she'd remove all troops from the Middle East. You know, we can be strong and smart at the same time. And when we do draw down, there's a right way and a wrong way. And what Trump has done in Syria is disastrously wrong. So this Trump-created crisis devolves further into chaos. What should we be doing? It's a logical question for the press and you all to ask me. What should we be doing? What would I be doing now? First, we should begin to work again closely with our NATO allies in the United Nations to bring more responsible parties to the table. The United States and Turkey are allies, even if Turkey is not acting like one. So we should be inviting a broader coalition of countries to pressure Turkey to pull back its operations, refrain from ethnic cleansing and targeting religious minorities, as well as cease its callous disregard for civilians. The international community should make it clear to the UN that we intend to investigate any reports of war crimes or violations of international humanitarian law and to hold accountable those who are responsible when it occurs. The second thing we should do, we should actively work to mediate a resolution between Turkey and the Kurds to end the violence. There is a way. There was a negotiation initially going on. The United States should be willing to set up and facilitate those talks and engage all sides. Leading the free world requires us to show up, to have some skin in the game. We shouldn't be delegating this to Putin. Third thing we should be doing, we have an obligation to provide critical humanitarian support to mitigate the new refugee crisis that's going to be occurring, unfolding before our very eyes. The Trump administration released $50 million humanitarian aid to Syria. But that's only a quarter of the $200 million in aid that already has been accommodated, but he suspended last year. And how will it be distributed? When frontline humanitarian groups, and they're all through that region, how are they going to do this? Then they've suspended their services, pulled their staffs out of the areas where they're fighting. We should be willing to carry out airlifts of food, water, critical aid, first supplies as they're needed. And fourthly, we have to remain laser focused on preventing the resurgence of ISIS. As the Kurds withdrew to defend their villages from Turkish attack, it's easy to imagine ISIS regrowing and filling the void. We can't let that happen for our own safety's sake. Because no matter how much Donald Trump tweets that it may be easy for Europeans to recapture escaped ISIS fighters, or for us to go back and blast ISIS, that hadn't worked before. That's not how it worked the first time. And it certainly won't be how it works now if we have to fight ISIS again. During our administration, we built a global coalition to take on ISIS that eventually grew to 81 partners. It was part of my responsibility to put that together. Not just us. We got 81 other nations to participate with us in curtailing ISIS's expansion and caliphate and rendering them not a threat. Nations and organizations from all around the world stood with us because they trusted the word of the United States of America under the Obama-Biden administration. So ask yourself, after everything Trump has done, after every international treaty that Trump has pulled out of, after every ally that Trump has attacked, after leaving partners to be slaughtered with no discernible strategy, after embracing some of the most outrageous thugs in the world, from Kim Jong-un to Putin, who's going to stand with us today to get this done? And if they don't stand with us, how many more brave sons and daughters will we have to send to fight alone in the future to protect ourselves? And that brings me to my final point that I want to make today. As President Trump's doing what he's doing in Syria is much bigger than Syria. It's more insidious than the betrayal of brave Kurdish partners. It's more dangerous than taking our boot off the neck of ISIS. Trump is demolishing the moral authority of the United States of America. I mean that in a literal sense. His incompetence is so extreme, his abuse of power is so rampant, that he's torching America's influence and our ability to get things done around the world. Climate change. We make up 15% of the problem. We're going to get 85% of the world to come back and cooperate with us when we put together the Paris Climate Accord. Mass migrations out of Venezuela and other places in the world. Unfair trade practices. Disruptive technologies, nuclear proliferation. The ascendancy of China, the resurgence of Russia. How will we meet any of these real global challenges we face if the United States is forever reduced in the eyes of the world to being an unreliable partner? Who is going to stand with us? Diplomacy isn't just a series of handshakes and photo opportunities. It's building relationships that you're constantly building, constantly maintaining, working to identify areas of common interest while managing points of conflict. It requires discipline. It requires a team of experienced professionals that you empower, not diminish or demote. It requires a coherent national security process to get everyone on the same page to execute. After almost 3 years as president, Trump still doesn't understand any of this. And he never will. Because the only thing he cares about is Donald Trump. Not our allies, not our neighbors, not our diplomats, not our values, not our leadership, not our standing in the world, not the incredible human suffering that's being caused by his decisions, not even the likelihood that ISIS, the most coherent and spread and dangerous terrorist group in modern history, not even that ISIS will regenerate once again, gain strength, and threaten the United States of America. There's so much at stake in this election. Issues that matter to every single American family. This is some abstract speech before the Council on Foreign Relations in New York City, a group of foreign policy experts. This is about how it affects the lives of everyday Americans, every single family, every one of them. And this is what it is. What does America stand for in the world? Who do we want to be? The United States builds alliances and works with our partner democracies for the sake of our own national security, our own economic prosperity. No country, even one as powerful as ours, can go it alone against the challenges that respect no borders and cannot be contained by walls. The investment we've made, that we make in others, have come back to benefit us tenfold in markets for our products, in partners to help us tackle global challenges, allies to help us deter aggression, or to fight alongside us if those deterrents fail. I met some gentlemen at the airport who were Vietnam veterans. At the time, I sat with them for just a moment before I came over here, talking about how we ran against being the world's policeman. America first means America alone. How do we deal with the crises that are going to affect us and every single American in Iowa and throughout the country? With stateless terror, all the things that affect our ability to survive, from global warming to a fair trade policy. How do we do that if we're out of the picture? Make no mistake, nations will make accommodations to work with those who are in the picture, or China or any other country. They'll make their own deals if they think they cannot be protected and or be part of an alliance with us. The world's going to move on without us. Donald Trump's vision is antithetical to everything generations of Americans have fought for, sacrificed, and defended. I believe we're so much better than Donald Trump thinks we are. I believe we can and must be the nation which the world looks to, mobilizes others for common good, the beacon of liberty, offering refugees and the oppressed options, a bulwark of democracy and self-determination, a champion of human rights, the leader of the free world. That's not a throwaway phrase. All of this is on the ballot next November. So we have to choose. We have to choose the American we want to be. We have to choose if we want to retake our place in the world, keep the United States safe and secure, because we built on our alliances, because we choose a president who will rebuild our credibility, restore the value of America's word. That's what's at stake here. Because I promise you, if we do not, others will make their accommodations. Imagine a world without NATO and a European alliance with us. Imagine a world without alliances in the Pacific. How long will it take some of these nations who no longer can take our word that we'll be with them as they will be us before they decide to go nuclear? Before they decide they have to act? Before they decide they have to make an accommodation with Putin or China? Folks, this policy has been a disaster. This president has been a disaster. We can change it. It's totally within our power. We just have to be sure that what we say we mean, we explain why we're doing it, and we make no apologies. So the world and the American public can look at whomever we pick and say, I believe that person. And I believe on day one, that person is ready to command the world stage, does not need any on-the-job training, and is known by everyone from Putin to our allies to be what he says or she says they are. That's what's at stake here, folks. If he doesn't do something totally, thoroughly reckless and cause us to get into a shooting war of consequence, we can overcome 4 years of this man. But we cannot. We cannot. He will ever forever change the nation of who we are, if in fact we do not defeat him this time. And that's my intention. I thank you. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops.
What am I doing? So high?